Many years ago, there were two, I've referred to them in the past, two great Jewish comedians in Israel, Zigen and Schumacher. Much of their work has to be censored, but originally they started out doing their acts in Yiddish on the streets of Tel Aviv. And interesting, the Ben Gurion Assad, that was prohibited then in this newborn democracy, any performances in Yiddish. So it took time till they regrouped and were able to do what they, sometime later, their work in Hebrew. Okay, so much for a newfound democracy and liberalism. Zigen told this story that somebody who's self-employed here in Israel, the way income tax works is that the burden of proof is on him that he made less than their estimation of how much he was likely to earn. So he gets called down to Internal Revenue, and he says he was kept waiting for a few hours, and then finally makes it in, and a very, very tall guy was 2 meters tall, sitting down, stares at him, a stony-faced clerk, Parkid, and after a silence, and he's all unnerved and rattled from the waiting and the interrogation, the clerk leans over and says, "From where do you have parnosa?" Zigen says, "I jumped up, I ran around the other side of the table, I hugged him and kissed him and said, 'You're the first person that cares.'" Somehow, the powers that be did not have their point of departure what we call chazaka. Whatever is in a man's possession, unless we know that there's some problem that has been created, it created a lacuna, it created a breach, a gap in his credibility, we assume it's his. We take it a bit further. Lahavdil, in the Shar Yoshe, Shar Hey, Reb Shimon Shkop says that the ownership is not the concept of ownership, and that which is in my possession belonging to me does not emanate from the law, the prohibition to steal. It's independent. It's a self-evident proposition that which I possess, unless I have reason to hold the owner suspect, there's some reason to generate that suspicion, I assume it's his, what we would call a chazaka. But Reb Shimon says that is an operative concept in the idea of Mishpatim, that it's that it belongs to someone who, the fellow who possesses it, unless I have reason to challenge that chazaka, that status quo. The question of ownership, very, very interesting kind of a debate in Western society over the last years especially, and very recently came to the fore again, is that that which is called Mishpatim, laws that society would have come to from using reason, utilitarian, kind of what's the benefit, what do we need to survive as a society? If we have to live together, we need each other. So then there have to be some operative norms that govern the interaction between people. This week's Parsha, Mishpatim, many of those self-evident propositions are discussed as we would differentiate. The Meforshim talk about the difference between chukim, that which were we don't have any obvious rationale for, or even mitzvahs, which are commemorative of historical events, but they aren't self-evident propositions. So the Malbim and others seem to guide us. And the Malbim says in Parashat Sekev that it's this interaction between the composite of Mishpatim, Chukim, and Mitzvahs, which gives us access, an index to appreciate that we're dealing with something which transcends the human intellect. It is the burden of proof then becomes there is something here. If it wasn't reasonable at all, it's hard to reckon with it. If it's exclusively reasonable, so then it's purely the invention of man in order to find a modus operandi to be able to survive. The interaction between the two causes suspicion, not proving, but it does indicate that there's something unusual and unique here. There are many other reasons to confirm that, but meanwhile, let's use this as a starting point. One of the debates I remember many years ago, and today it surfaced again, was what are the rights of a homeowner if somebody invades his property? That there was a black judge let him loose Bruce, that he would go to all kinds of psychological analyses of the suffering, the lack of justice to many black people historically, and therefore that we have to reckon with that, and that has to be a rationale for limiting the ability of the homeowner to respond, to react to. He can't respond excessively to the invader, the burglar coming as a sneak thief in the middle of the night. I remember there was a case on the Long Island Railroad of, again, it was a black person over there in particular, just happened to be that he murdered a number of people on the Long Island Railroad. And the Jewish lawyer, again, said it was rage that from the suffering. Is much of that prejudice unjustified? Of course. But when it allows for burning shops and stores and no governance at all, then we're dealing with chaos and a jungle, and there is no limitation. The halacha has it, if a sneak thief comes in the middle of the night, a burglar, that the homeowner has a right to take a preemptive strike, because he can assume that the thief assumes you're going to protect your property, so he's prepared to be violent. He comes in al menas, with the assumption on the condition, prepared, geared up to be violent. And therefore, I don't have to wait for him to be violent. I can take a preemptive strike, except if it's abundantly clear, it's zorach alav hashemesh, it becomes clear that he's not going to be violent. When is that true? If it's a father stealing from a son. A father will not be violent to the son. And the halacha is developed that there's a difference, that fathers, generally speaking, will not kill sons. Son can kill a father. The Cherkava takes this one step further. The Cherkava has it. Why is that seem to be a principle that is real, and we find in the nature of man? Says the Cherkava that the first man, Adam Rishon, Chazal used the lotion, he was the Yitzir Kap of the handiwork of the Rebbeinu Shalom. He did not have a biological father. He did have a biological son. So it's built into the DNA of humankind, the ava, the love of father to son. Son to father was not. He was Yitzir Kapov of a Kodesh Baruch Hu. It has to be learned. It has to be taught. There have to be mitzvahs to so much Nebuch, Lo Aleinu, these days we've been paying Shiva calls around the globe during this plague, during this Magefa. I remember it was told that the 3 Rosh Yeshiva Gedolim came to a Shiva call, and the discussion proceeded, why is there a difference of the Avelos for a parent, Lo Aleinu, or for someone else that one is obligated to sit Shiva for, but not a parent? There's only 30 days. But a parent is for a year. The Kaddish is recited 11 months for the calculation that we're proceeding from the premise that didn't have to be that neshama, didn't need the Kaddish for 12 months. But the Avelis actually lasts for 12 months. And the Kriya is Ad Alev. For somebody else, Lo Aleinu, it's just the external garment. It's not Ad Halev. So there were 3 people present, 3 Rosh Yeshiva, the Rabbi Yoshe Ber Soloveitchik, Reb Shneur Kotler, and Rav Hutner. So Rabbi Yoshe Ber said, life comes from, it was Reb Shneur said, the life comes from the parent, the very life, the one of the Shutfim, the 3 Shutfim in the creation of the human being, and therefore the obligation. So Chazal gave it another dimension of Avelis. Rabbi Yoshe Ber says somebody goes through life thinking he paid back the debt he owes his parents. So Chazal want us to recognize that that's not true. You're always in a deficit. Rav Hutner talked about last week's parasha, the fact that the first 5 of the mitzvahs of the 10 commandments, the first 5 of the commandments are bein odom lemokom, the second 5 bein odom lechavero, and yet kibbud av v'em appears in the first 5. It would seem that it's a man-man mitzvah, not a man-God mitzvah. And he discussed how the whole Masoret, the whole tradition comes from father to son through the generations, the edus, the testimony, So everything stands or falls on that. Of course, he wasn't. He was a champion of tshuva when there have been hiccups in generations, and we know that. But there's damage that's caused. Not everybody makes it to reconnect after there has been a hiccup. That's the ideal, that it should be passed that way, and it's made therefore from father to son. All true, and we could add this primary angle of perception is that the man has to learn the relationship to a parent. It's part of what Schiller was alluding to, but part of what they all were saying. But as evinced, as manifested in this idea of the Avelis being halachically different, and our window in always, as we said recently, the Kavle Kov, Tzavle Tzov, we draw the lines between the halachic realities, and that helps us formulate a conceptual picture and to go further. Now, I'd like to borrow this paradigm and take it and apply it elsewhere. Well, Talmudically speaking, we often tread on controversial territory. So let's keep going, because the whole world is our course of study, all of life and everything that exists. Just that we go from the particular to the universal in order to get to the universal picture, because we're always proceeding from the premise we're dealing with revealed truth, we're dealing with an emes that was revealed at Sinai, and my access to it. Why? Okay. There's much reason to believe that, contrary to many of the naysayers, but it has a lot to do with an objective, disinterested, not uninterested, disinterested, objective, not biased kind of an approach to studying history, the claims, the uniqueness, the outrageous claims, audacious claims that Klal Yisrael has made, and that have predictions that could not, should not have been vindicated, that we're working with and living with today. Okay, so let's go weiter. Let's continue borrowing this paradigm. There were two women psychologists at Harvard years back, did some very, very famous research, Gilligan and Travis, and they gave moral dilemmas to men and women to solve. And invariably, the men looked for a principle, a concept, some definition of what would be the just thing to do, the moral thing to do in these conditions, and then try and apply it to the situation that was under question. Men, talking about non-Jews, experiments. The women invariably looked to improve the relationships of the players on the field. The women were relationship-oriented, the men were concept-oriented. Gilligan and Travis, right? And neither one learned in Beis Yaakov, nor Stern College. Gilligan and Travis at Harvard, as Casey Stengel said, you can look it up. And by the way, he was preceded by James Thurber, who used that as a theme in a story many years before Stengel applied it. Okay. Next, Gilligan and Travis. Step 2. There was a Jewish girl, a linguist, again, not an alumnus of any seminary, somebody named Tannen, and she talked about the problems of communication between men and women, which a number of books have been written on this, and the catchy titles that have been used. But she said the primary problem is men and women use language differently. Tannen speaking, not me, Tannen. Men use language to communicate information. Therefore, when they communicated the information or heard the information, there's no point in talking anymore. Women do not use language in that manner, says Tannen. They use language to enhance, validate, confirm relationship. And therefore, even after the information has been communicated, they want to speak and they want you to speak, because the purpose of the speaking is to confirm, enhance relationship. Women are relationship oriented. Okay, so now let's go. I'm borrowing the paradigm from the Machteres Yoveh Ganev. How Adam was created, right? Did not have a biological father. Okay, now let's go with man and woman are created. Oh, Torah Shebiksav, and the perspective of Torah Shebiksav through Chazal, through Talmud, through Medrash. Otherwise, we can't find up or down. If there's anything we cannot be, it's fundamentalists, because we cannot approach the Torah Shebiksav without decoding it based on the Talmudic perspective, which was simultaneously given as Teiros few times. The Psukim teach us that initially there already were, and we have this Masoret from father to son through the generations. Okay, why do we believe this? Another discussion, but this is what we believe. I think some of you may remember that Lahavdil, I was once on many times, but one time in particular on an El Al flight, and the Rebbeinu Shalom, in his cosmic sense of humor, sat an evangelical priest next to me, and he had a bunch of his congregants that were coming for a pilgrimage to the Holy Land, and a few times he asked me some questions, and I tried to be correct, but didn't expand the conversation. After a period of time, he asked me something, and I told him that's not the way we read. He said, that's what it says. He said, but you're a student. I said, no. He said, you're a student of the Bible, aren't you? I said, yeah. No, not what you call Bible. I'm not a student of the Bible. I'm a student of Torah. The Bible is only the written text, and for us Torah Jews, if you read the written text without the perspective of the Talmud, it's a confusing, chaotic, redundant, poetically, wonderfully uplifting, spiritual in many places, but it's not the same thing as Torah. And he says, you're making it too complicated. I said, yeah, life is complicated. And going through the Talmud helps us unravel a lot of the challenges of being a human being. He had his cheering squad, I had my cheering squad, and we landed in Tel Aviv. I doubt whether I made much of a dent on him. Okay, so Chazal teach us as we're proceeding from this premise, that the Odom Rishon is created, even if you hold du parzufim, they were created two countenances, that there was somehow that surely if it was stage one was Odom and stage two, that Chava was brought in. But even if you hold there were two countenances, somehow that the psukim already guide us in the direction and an easy understanding through the medrashim and the meforshim how to understand it, but it does mean that she is created in relation to, she's an Eza Kenegdo, she's a helpmeet, she's in relation to Odom. Is he incomplete without her? Yes. Is marriage defined as completion, shleimus for the Torah Jew? Yes. So it becomes kind of a moot question. It's not a question of giving a value judgment. We're talking here about completion and how on the ground to interact, in which manner the Torah is guiding us. Okay. So Adam is created. He's created in relation to the intelligence that he can deal with outside of himself, is a non-corporeal reality, is the Rebbeinu Shalom, an abstraction. He's dealing conceptually, immediately in that which he can, to whom he can express, and that shapes how he expresses. Chava is created in relation to an existing human being, in relation to Adam. And therefore, her psychological landscape is shaped in relation to another. So she would be relationship-oriented, a la Travis and Gilligan. She would then use language, a la Tannen, in a different manner. Such is how we would get a handle on these concepts. Chazal teach us, Mikom Alamdai Hiskalti. I was once in a taxi in New York, and the cab driver had on a radio program, and was talking about some husband that made the mistake of going shopping with his wife for some clothes that she wanted, and he was going. This is was supposed to be X amount, and it was X plus Y plus Z time, and he, in desperation, he runs over to the woman clerk over there, and he said, I'm trying to find my way out of here. Don't you have anything in this department store for men? To which the female clerk in the women's clothing section said, excuse me, mister, everything here is for men. Psychologically, the orientation. Lahavdil, Reuven Fein, Rosh Shiva at Tervedas, Zatzal, once asked, we say, Lo sasuru ache levavchem ve'ache einechem. How come the Posek says, first don't go after your heart, which is the source of the Yetzer Hara, we say, is in as the heart takes the blood and it energizes the passion for life and for hormonal satisfaction. And the Einayim are kind of an agent that pedals to the heart, it markets to the heart. So how come it says Achei Levavchem ve'Achei Einechem? Why doesn't it say the other way? Why does it say Achei Einechem, Achei Levavchem? So there are various tshuvas that are given to this. Reuven Fein said, because Achei levavchem, v'achei nechem is talking about the distaff portion of the population, the female population. Female population then is before it's enechem. They're going to generate the enechem, but it's innate, it's built in to their sense of projecting femininity in a manner that confirms the attractiveness and its function in the universe. Monitored, guided, directed, it's a bracha for the world. It's a bracha for Klal Yisrael and leads to Kedusha, Taira. That's why Kedushin, the act of betrothal for the halachic Jew, is designating, is uplifting and designating for a unique role and relationship in utilizing all of the inclinations and desires that mankind has. So can he become disconnected? That would be, of course. That's why she, root biologically, is connected to a cyclical reality in her nature, and therefore she doesn't need, it has been posited, the mitzvah shezman groma to be put back into time. The male of the species needs that. And of course, shleimus means the interaction between the two, and he is incomplete, and that's what Torah teaches throughout Torah on how it can work. The Kaisema Lebeis Yaakov, we read that this is what you should teach the women, v'saged lebnei Yisrael, that the saged is a tough lotion, like the gidim, the tendons, the muscles. So that's one reading of it. The Mashal says saged is second person masculine, but it's third person feminine. Kaisema Lebeis Yaakov, this is what you should teach the women. The saged, and she will teach B'nai Yisrael, because she's at home and she's going to shape the orientation and sensitivities of the child in the home and the next generation. Mashal and Seta. So Klal Yisrael have a unique perception of the interaction between ownership, between primary realities of society, what are the limitations of my responses, and self-evident propositions. Relationships between the sexes, and even when injustice has been perpetrated, it doesn't mean that you abandon altogether any kind of sense of limitation for how the outrage can be dispersed and vented on a society. And the extension of that, of course, is that you cannot hold every Black person responsible for the misbehavior, the wild, reckless behavior of a minority. And you have to be sensitive to an appreciation of the fact that there is a lot of baggage through the generations that has been carried, and it has to be dealt with. So we live in a world today that it's part of the message seems to be that the universality of the plague, that it affects every strata of society. People, no matter what their history was, but there are certain people that have dedicated themselves to researching, doctors, laboratory people. That there's a lot of goodness that has come out of the devotion of harnessing individual sense of a need for expression, a need to help mankind. And once again, the message of the inescapability of what Chazal teach us, that to be lome, to learn from every man. I'll end with this, that Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshitz says on the mitzvah of Talmud Torah. It's a mitzvah for the men, not for the women. So he asks, because remember, there's always going to be different areas of emphasis and stress, because and excellence, because like the Marshal says, Saget, she'll do a better job at home with the early years of nurturing and directing the ruchnius of those children. Also, Chazal ask, it seems to be a strange question, says Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshitz in the Yoros Dvash, how come the Gemara asks, Noshim b'meh zochu, how do women merit? That the Gemara answers that they by guiding their children and supporting their husbands spiritually, emotionally, for their mitzvahs of limud Torah. Obvious question, says Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshitz, is women have all the mitzvahs asay that are not zan groma, and all the mitzvahs lois asay, the negative mitzvahs, the mitzvahs that are not linked to time, and the mitzvahs that all the negative mitzvahs. So what's the question? So he said it's a wrong read of zochu. Zochu means not what they merit. It means how do they overcome the Yetzer Hara. Because I'll say, but also Yetzer Hara, I created the Yetzer Hara, and I created the antidote is Torah learning. So if they don't have the mitzvah of Torah learning, how do they govern the Yetzer Hara? The answer is they do have a connection to Torah learning. It cannot take place in its ideal form without their input, and therefore they're an integral part of that limud Torah. Again, Zochu means triumph in the contest, in the struggle between, in the grapple with the Yetzer Hara. And so, as the urgency, the sense of keeping our balance, our appreciation, that our window in for connection to sanctity, for understanding of the universe, is through the window of Torah. The window of windows, yeah, it's helpful. It's a tool. But our window in, our door in to understanding the nature of what it means to be human and what it means to be a Jew in such times as the surfacing of anti-Semitism in such an aggressive, threatening manner, including the Purim spiel in Hague, right? At just in time to fulfill. It was another European, a Britisher, who once said, being anti-Semitic means despising the Jews more than is necessary. Subliminally, it's there. It surfaces in moments that are obvious when there seems to be a sense of urgency, of threat, of panic in the universe. And we have to understand that it was to be expected, it was anticipated. And what do we have to do? Plug back in to who we are, what we are, with sensitivity, with appreciation for anyone who is coming from the outside in, or even just peeking from the outside in, to try and project a sense of appreciation that we know that we are linked to a link of an entire universe, and that Tikkun Olam, if we look at the Am Yisrael as being a vanguard, as being champions of leading the charge, yes, but we want Tikkun Olam for the entire world. Yeshua Surafus, Surah Tevis for everybody. Thank you.